911, what's your emergency?
Please, please, you have to come. He's not breathing. I don't know what to do. Oh my God, oh my God.
Ma'am, I need you to take a breath. What's your name?
Elaine Mercer, please hurry.
We're on the way, Elaine. How old is he?
He's 8. He's just 8. I can't get him to wake.
This account reconstructs a homicide investigation using patterns documented in similar cases where deception complicated the search for truth. Names and specific details have been altered. On April 8, 2025, at 6:23 p.m., patrol officers responded to a frantic 911 call from Elaine Mercer, who reported finding her husband David murdered in their suburban home in Westlake. Body camera footage from Officer Jason Reynolds captured the scene as police arrived. Elaine Mercer on the front lawn, mascara streaking down her face, collapsing into the arms of the first responder. "He's in there," she sobbed, pointing toward the house. "Who would do this to him? Who would take him from me?" Detective Layla Sharma, an 11-year veteran with the Westlake Police Department's Homicide Division, arrived 20 minutes later. What initially appeared to be a straightforward home invasion would soon become the most complex case of her career. If you're watching from the Westlake area, you might remember the headlines that dominated local news for weeks. But what wasn't reported, what couldn't be reported until now, was how quickly investigators began questioning the grieving widow's story, even as the community rallied around her. Subscribe now to follow this investigation as we reveal the shocking truth behind a murder that was anything but what it seemed. David Mercer, 45, was found in his home office with a single gunshot wound to the chest. The medical examiner would later determine he had been dead for approximately 2 hours before Elaine's 911 call. The house showed signs of disturbance. Drawers pulled open, papers scattered, suggesting a robbery or search for valuables. "I was at yoga class, then grocery shopping," Elaine told Detective Sharma, her hands trembling as she accepted a cup of water. "David works from home on Tuesdays. When I came back and called for him, I found him like that. Who would do this to him?" Everyone loved David. Initial interviews with neighbors seemed to support Elaine's devastation. Margaret Wilson, who lived next door, told officers, "I heard the most horrible screams. I'll never forget that sound, pure anguish. I ran outside and saw Elaine on her knees in the driveway. She loved that man more than anything." David and Elaine Mercer had moved to Westlake 3 years earlier. He worked as a software developer for a cybersecurity firm, while she ran a successful interior design business. They were active in community events, donated to local charities, and by all accounts, were the perfect couple. At first glance, everything aligned with Mrs. Mercer's account, Detective Sharma noted in her initial report. The scene suggested a home invasion, possibly interrupted when the victim unexpectedly confronted the intruder. But as crime scene technicians processed the Mercer residence, Detective Sharma noticed something unusual. While the house appeared ransacked, nothing of obvious value was missing. Expensive electronics remained untouched. Elaine's jewelry box in the bedroom was undisturbed. The only things that seemed to be missing were papers from David's desk. It wasn't a robbery, Sharma would later testify. It was staged to look like one. This was someone searching for specific documents. As investigators began processing the scene, they discovered David's laptop was still running. The screen showed an email draft, never sent, addressed to a lawyer. The subject line read, "Urgent, identity fraud evidence." The body of the email contained just one line. "I've discovered my wife is not who she claims to be." While Elaine sat with a victim advocate in the living room, Detective Sharma quietly instructed her team to expand their investigation. "Process everything," she whispered to her partner. "Something isn't right here." The first crack in Elaine's story came when officers reviewed security footage from their neighbor's doorbell camera. It showed Elaine arriving home, not at 6:15 p.m. as she claimed, but at 4:37 p.m., approximately 30 minutes after the estimated time of David's death. More concerning was what the footage didn't show: any sign of another person entering or leaving the Mercer home that afternoon. When detectives contacted the yoga studio where Elaine claimed to have been, the instructor confirmed she had attended class, but it had ended at 3:45 p.m., not 5:30 p.m. as Elaine had stated. The grocery store receipts she provided were genuine, but time-stamped at 4:12 p.m., not 5:45 p.m. By midnight, less than 6 hours after Elaine's tearful 911 call, detectives had obtained a search warrant for her phone records, computer, and personal effects. What they discovered would transform their understanding of not just the murder, but of who Elaine Mercer really was, or rather, who she wasn't. The dashboard camera from a patrol car captured Elaine's reaction when Detective Sharma returned to question her timeline discrepancies. For just a moment, her grief-stricken expression hardened, her eyes calculating, before she quickly recovered. "I must be confused about the times," Elaine insisted, wiping fresh tears. "Everything's a blur. I found my husband murdered. Can't this wait?" But detectives were already uncovering evidence that suggested Elaine's deception went far beyond confused timelines. As they continued processing David's home office, forensic technicians discovered a hidden compartment in his desk containing a manila envelope. Inside were printouts of newspaper articles from Bellingham, Washington, dated 7 years earlier. The articles detailed the disappearance of a 28-year-old woman named Catherine Winters, who had vanished while hiking in the Cascade Mountains. The case had gone cold after months of searching yielded no results. Attached to the articles was a driver's license photo of Catherine Winters, who bore a striking resemblance to Elaine Mercer. Also in the envelope, documentation showing that Elaine Mercer's Social Security number had only been activated 3 years ago, just before she and David moved to Westlake. There were printouts of property records for a cabin in rural Idaho, purchased 6 years earlier by Catherine Winters, and sold 2 years later by someone claiming to be her sister, using forged documentation. Most damning was a handwritten note in David's distinctive script, confronting tomorrow. Need answers before going to authorities. What happened to David Mercer? Was his murder truly the work of an unknown intruder? Or was it the desperate act of a woman whose carefully constructed life was about to collapse? And who was the real Elaine Mercer? If you've ever wondered how someone could hide in plain sight, subscribe now and hit the notification bell. In our next segment, we'll reveal what investigators discovered when they began unraveling the true identity of the woman who called herself Elaine Mercer, and the dark secret she was willing to kill to protect. What do you think David discovered about his wife that cost him his life? Share your theories in the comments below. As dawn broke over Westlake on April 9, 2025, Detective Sharma assembled her team for a briefing that would fundamentally alter the direction of their investigation. "We're no longer looking at a home invasion," she told them, pinning photos to the incident board. "We're investigating the possibility that Elaine Mercer murdered her husband to prevent him from exposing her true identity. The first 24 hours of any homicide investigation are crucial, and by morning, detectives had uncovered enough inconsistencies to justify bringing Elaine in for formal questioning. She arrived at the station still dressed in morning black, clutching a handkerchief, the very picture of a grieving widow. "I don't understand why I'm here," she said, her voice trembling. "I should be planning my husband's funeral, not answering more questions." According to Detective Ryan Park's interview notes, subject maintains consistent emotional display but becomes evasive when pressed on specific timeline discrepancies. Shows signs of rehearsed responses rather than genuine recall. The interview took a dramatic turn when Detective Sharma placed the newspaper articles about Catherine Winters on the table between them. "Would you like to explain why your husband had these?" she asked. According to the interview transcript, Elaine stared at the articles for 47 seconds without speaking, an eternity in an interrogation room. When she finally responded, her voice had changed subtly, losing its emotional tremor. "I don't know what these are," she said. "David never showed these to me." "That's interesting," Detective Sharma replied, "because we found your fingerprints on them. And on the note, David wrote about confronting you." This revelation was a calculated bluff. The fingerprint analysis wasn't complete yet, but it achieved its purpose. Elaine's demeanor transformed before their eyes, captured perfectly by the interview room camera. Her posture straightened, her eyes hardened. The hand that had been trembling now lay perfectly still on the table. "I want a lawyer," she said. While Elaine consulted with her attorney, investigators continued piecing together the puzzle of her identity. They contacted authorities in Bellingham, Washington, where Catherine Winters had disappeared 7 years earlier. The Winters case went cold after months of searching. Detective Marcus Chun of the Bellingham Police Department testified in his deposition. Catherine was an experienced hiker who went missing during what should have been a routine day hike. Her car was found at the trailhead, but despite extensive search efforts, no body was ever recovered. Most of us assumed she'd fallen in a remote area we couldn't access. What made the case particularly tragic was that Catherine had disappeared just 2 weeks after being questioned in connection with a fatal hit-and-run accident that had killed a 12-year-old boy. While she was never formally charged, case notes indicated she remained the primary person of interest. We had circumstantial evidence placing her vehicle near the scene, Detective Chen explained. Paint transfer on the victim's bicycle matched her car model, but we needed more to make an arrest. Then she vanished, and the case stalled. The timing suggested a disturbing possibility. Had Catherine Winters staged her own disappearance to escape potential manslaughter charges? Forensic analysis of the Mercer home yielded another crucial piece of evidence. Hidden behind a false panel in Elaine's closet, technicians discovered a lockbox containing $15,000 in cash, a passport in the name of Rebecca Lane with Elaine's photo, and a handwritten journal. The journal entries are particularly revealing. Forensic psychologist Dr. Vanessa Torres noted in her assessment. They detail the methodical creation of the Elaine Mercer identity, including practice sessions for developing a new handwriting style, notes on fabricating a consistent backstory, and strategies for avoiding detection. One entry, dated approximately 3 years earlier, read, "David is perfect, successful enough to provide stability, trusting enough not to question inconsistencies, and socially isolated enough that his circle is manageable. His work in cybersecurity is ironic, so focused on digital threats that he misses the one sitting across the breakfast table." As investigators dug deeper into Elaine's background, they discovered that everything about her life before moving to Westlake was fabricated. The college degree she claimed to have, the records were falsified. The family she occasionally mentioned visiting in Colorado, they didn't exist. The interior design business she ran, it was legitimate, but established only after meeting David, using his connections and resources. She created Elaine Mercer from scratch, Detective Sharma testified. Every detail was carefully constructed to be believable but difficult to verify. The few clients who visited their home saw family photos, all digitally altered to insert her image into David's actual family gatherings. The most damning evidence came from David's email account. In the weeks before his murder, he had exchanged messages with a private investigator named James Morales. Their correspondence revealed that David had become suspicious after discovering discrepancies in Elaine's background while organizing their financial documents for a mortgage refinancing. Client reports finding inconsistencies in spouse's SSN usage history. Morales wrote in his case notes, submitted as evidence. Initial background check confirms anomalies. Identity appears to have been established approximately 3 years ago with minimal prior history, recommending deeper investigation into potential identity fraud. The final email from Morales, sent the morning of David's murder, contained a bombshell, facial recognition match found, sending a full report with supporting documentation. Recommend caution in confronting subject given circumstances of original disappearance. Attached was a comprehensive file linking Elaine Mercer to Catherine Winters, including driver's license photos, distinctive scar patterns, and dental records obtained through insurance claims that David had access to as the primary policyholder on their health insurance. According to the forensic analysis of David's computer, he had opened this email at 3:52 p.m. on the day of his murder, approximately 15 minutes before Elaine arrived home, not at 6:15 p.m. as she had initially claimed. The evidence suggests David Mercer discovered his wife's true identity that afternoon, prosecutor Elena Vasquez stated during the preliminary hearing. He learned not only that she had been living under a false identity, but that she was potentially responsible for the death of a child in Washington state years earlier. When confronted, she made a split-second decision that ending his life was preferable to having her carefully constructed new existence destroyed. The ballistics report provided the final piece of the puzzle. The bullet that killed David matched a 9mm Glock registered in his name, a gun that was missing from the scene. According to friends, David had purchased the weapon 2 years earlier for home protection, keeping it in a biometric safe in his office. Only 2 people had access to that safe. Detective Park testified, David Mercer and his wife. As Act 2 of this investigation closes, the question is no longer whether Elaine Mercer killed her husband, but what dark path led Catherine Winters to become Elaine Mercer, and what really happened on that mountain trail 7 years ago that set this tragedy in motion. What would drive someone to completely abandon their identity and create a new one? And how did David Mercer finally uncover the truth about the woman he thought he knew? The answers and the full extent of Catherine/Elaine's deception will be revealed in our next segment. Do you think Catherine Winters planned her disappearance all along, or was it a spontaneous decision after the hit and run? Share your thoughts in the comments below. On April 12, 2025, 4 days into the investigation, Detective Sharma received a call that would transform the case entirely. This is Detective Marcus Chun from Bellingham PD. The caller identified himself. "I'm on my way to your jurisdiction with evidence you need to see in person. It's about Catherine Winters, and it's worse than we thought." Within hours, Detective Chun arrived at the Westlake Police Department with a case file that left even the veteran detective stunned. What they had uncovered wasn't just a woman who had faked her death to escape potential manslaughter charges. It was something far more calculated and disturbing. "We reopened the Winters disappearance case after your inquiry," Chun explained during the joint briefing. "Something about it never sat right with me. The timing was too convenient, vanishing just as we were closing in on the hit and run. So I went back to the beginning, re-examining evidence we'd collected from her apartment 7 years ago." According to Chin's report, investigators had initially focused on the hiking trail where Catherine was last seen. But stored in evidence was a laptop recovered from her apartment that had never been fully analyzed due to encryption issues. "Technology's advanced since then," Chin explained. "Our cyber unit finally cracked it last night. What we found was essentially a blueprint for disappearing. The laptop contained detailed research on creating new identities, evading digital footprints, and establishing credit histories. More disturbing were the notes on selecting transition targets, wealthy, socially isolated individuals who could provide resources and legitimacy to a new identity. This wasn't a spontaneous disappearance after a tragic accident," Chin testified. "Catherine Winters had been planning to vanish for at least a year before the hit and run. The accident just accelerated her timeline." The revelation that transformed the investigation came when forensic accountants discovered a pattern of systematic theft from Catherine's former employer, Northstar Financial Services, where she had worked as an investment advisor. Over 3 years, she had embezzled approximately $1. The revelation that transformed the investigation came when forensic accountants discovered a pattern of systematic theft from Catherine's former employer, Northstar Financial Services, where she had worked as an investment advisor. Over 3 years, she had embezzled approximately $1.7 million from client accounts, using sophisticated methods to conceal the transactions. She was siphoning small amounts from dozens of accounts, primarily belonging to elderly clients unlikely to notice discrepancies, explained forensic accountant Sophia Rivera. The firm was just weeks away from their annual audit when Catherine disappeared. She didn't flee because of the hit and run. She fled because her financial crimes were about to be exposed. This discovery fundamentally altered investigators' understanding of the case. Catherine Winters hadn't just assumed a new identity to escape potential manslaughter charges. She had meticulously planned her disappearance to avoid prosecution for a years-long financial fraud scheme. The hit and run was never the primary motive for her disappearance, Detective Chen concluded. It was just the final catalyst that forced her to execute a plan she'd been developing for months. The most disturbing evidence came from a hidden folder on Catherine's laptop labeled Phoenix Protocol, her personal name for her rebirth strategy. It contained detailed evaluations of potential targets who could provide her with a new life, including photographs and personal information for 3 men, one of whom was David Mercer. She had been stalking David for months before her disappearance, Detective Sharma testified. His profile in the folder noted his recent divorce, his financial stability, his work in cybersecurity, and most importantly, his exploitable loneliness. She had mapped out his entire routine, including the coffee shop he visited every Tuesday morning, where they accidentally met 6 months after her disappearance. When confronted with this evidence during interrogation, Elaine's composed facade finally cracked. Security footage from the interview room captured the moment, her expression shifting from calculated defensiveness to cold pragmatism as she realized the extent of what investigators had discovered. "You have no idea what it's like to be trapped in a life you never wanted," she said, her voice suddenly devoid of the emotional tremor that had characterized her previous statements. Catherine Winters was a mistake. Elaine Mercer was a correction. It was the first genuine statement she had made since her arrest. The investigation took another dramatic turn when ballistics experts made a crucial discovery about the murder weapon. The bullet that killed David matched not only the type of gun he owned, but contained microscopic striations consistent with a silencer, a modification not included in David's original purchase. This wasn't a crime of passion or a spontaneous reaction to being discovered. Firearms expert Dr. James Wilson testified. The use of a silencer indicates premeditation. Someone had modified that weapon well before the confrontation occurred. When investigators searched the storm drain 2 blocks from the Mercer home, they found both the murder weapon and the silencer, wiped clean of prints but containing trace DNA that matched Elaine's profile. She came prepared for the possibility of discovery, Detective Sharma noted in her case summary. The question is whether she had always planned to eliminate David once he had served his purpose, or if his discovery of her true identity forced her hand. The answer came from David's own digital footprint. In the weeks before his murder, he had been researching identity theft and fraud, initially focused on protecting their financial accounts, but gradually shifting toward investigating Elaine herself. His search history revealed queries about verifying educational credentials, requests for information from alumni associations where Elaine claimed to have studied, and eventually, consultations with private investigators specializing in identity verification. David Mercer wasn't just suspicious of his wife. Digital forensics specialist Kevin Zhang testified. He was methodically building a case against her, documenting every inconsistency he found. The tragic irony is that his background in cybersecurity gave him the skills to uncover her deception, but also made him dangerously overconfident in his ability to confront her safely. The final piece of the puzzle fell into place when investigators discovered a storage unit rented under yet another alias, Rebecca Lane, containing everything Catherine/Elaine would need to disappear again: cash, identification documents, disguise materials, and a detailed exit strategy with multiple international destinations mapped out. This wasn't just a contingency plan, Detective Sharma explained. The rental agreement was signed just 3 weeks before David's murder, and the unit contained recently purchased supplies. She was actively preparing to disappear again, suggesting she may have been planning to eliminate David regardless of whether he discovered her secret. Now, the question is no longer whether Catherine Winters became Elaine Mercer to escape her past, but whether David Mercer was always meant to be a temporary stepping stone in her ongoing reinvention, a means to an end that had reached its conclusion. What drives someone to not just change their identity, but to methodically select and exploit another human being as part of that transformation? And how many other lives might Catherine/Elaine have planned to assume if her scheme hadn't been uncovered? The answers, and the full extent of her calculated deception, will be revealed in our next segment. As Catherine Winters, now known to the world as Elaine Mercer, awaited trial in county jail, the consequences of her actions began to cascade across multiple jurisdictions. The joint task force established between Westlake Police and Bellingham authorities expanded to include the FBI's Financial Crimes Division, as the scope of her deception stretched far beyond a single murder or identity theft. We've identified at least 3 distinct criminal enterprises. FBI Special Agent Melissa Torres testified before a grand jury in May 2025. The original embezzlement scheme at North Star Financial, the identity theft and fraud involved in becoming Elaine Mercer, and the premeditated murder of David Mercer. Each alone would merit significant charges, but together they reveal a level of criminal sophistication rarely seen outside organized crime. The financial investigation uncovered the full extent of Catherine's embezzlement. The $1.7 million initially identified was just the beginning. Forensic accountants traced funds through a labyrinth of offshore accounts and shell companies, eventually identifying over $3.2 million stolen from elderly clients, many of whom had suffered significant financial hardship as a result. She specifically targeted vulnerable seniors with limited financial literacy, testified Nathan Goldberg, the current CEO of North Star Financial. Many were widows or widowers who trusted Catherine implicitly. Some lost their retirement savings and homes. One client, Margaret Wilson, was forced to move into assisted living after losing over $200,000 that was meant to fund her in-home care. The human toll of Catherine's crimes became increasingly clear as victims from each phase of her criminal evolution came forward. Family members of the hit-and-run victim, 12-year-old Jason Patel, had spent years without closure, believing the driver who killed their son had met her own tragic end on a hiking trail. We actually felt sorry for her when she disappeared, Jason's mother, Priya Patel, stated in her victim impact statement. We thought 2 lives had been lost because of a terrible accident. To learn she was alive all this time, living a comfortable life while we visited our son's grave. There are no words for that kind of betrayal. The investigation into Catherine/Elaine's background revealed a pattern of deception stretching back to her early 20s. Former colleagues described her as charming but elusive, always deflecting personal questions while showing intense interest in others' lives and financial situations. She was collecting information on all of us. Former co-worker Thomas Reynolds testified. What seemed like friendly interest was actually reconnaissance. She knew which clients were vulnerable, which colleagues might notice discrepancies, and exactly how to avoid detection. In hindsight, everything about her was calculated. As prosecutors built their case, the defense strategy shifted repeatedly. Initially claiming self-defense, arguing that David had become violent when confronting her about her identity. Catherine/Elaine's attorneys abandoned this approach when the evidence of premeditation became overwhelming. They then pivoted to a mental health defense, suggesting their client suffered from dissociative identity disorder. The defendant does not have multiple personalities, psychiatric expert Dr. Amelia Harrington testified for the prosecution. She has one highly adaptive, calculating personality that creates and discards identities as tools. This is not mental illness in the clinical sense. It's the methodical behavior of someone who views other people as resources to be exploited. The financial consequences for Catherine/Elaine began mounting even before trial. Civil asset forfeiture proceedings froze her known accounts, while victims of her embezzlement scheme filed lawsuits totaling over $8 million. The IRS launched its own investigation into tax evasion, potentially adding decades to any sentence she might receive. We've identified approximately 70% of the embezzled funds, FBI Financial Crimes Specialist Agent Robertson stated in his affidavit. The remaining 30%, approximately $960,000, remains unaccounted for, likely hidden in cryptocurrency or physical assets we haven't yet discovered. As the trial date approached, Catherine/Elaine made one final attempt to manipulate the system. Through an elaborate scheme involving coded messages hidden in seemingly innocuous legal documents, she attempted to contact associates from her financial crimes days, offering substantial payment for creating a distraction during a scheduled courthouse transfer. The plot was discovered when a court clerk noticed unusual formatting in documents submitted by her defense team. Formatting that, when decoded, contained instructions for a courthouse disruption that would create an opportunity for escape. This attempt demonstrates both consciousness of guilt and ongoing danger to the public. Judge Eleanor Simmons ruled, ordering enhanced security measures and complete communication restrictions for the remainder of the pretrial period. The consequences continued to expand beyond the criminal case. Identity verification protocols at financial institutions nationwide were strengthened in direct response to the case. The Mercer Protocol was established as a new framework for detecting identity assumption, particularly in cases involving financial professionals who might have the knowledge to create convincing false personas. Perhaps the most profound impact came in the form of legislative change. Dubbed David's Law, a bill was introduced in the state legislature requiring enhanced background verification for individuals working in financial services, particularly those with access to client accounts, a direct response to how easily Catherine had exploited her position at Northstar Financial. My brother's death exposed a predator who had operated undetected for years, David's sister Jennifer Mercer testified before the legislative committee. If these safeguards had existed sooner, not only might David still be alive, but dozens of elderly victims might have been spared financial ruin. As Catherine/Elaine's case proceeded toward trial, the full human cost of her crimes became increasingly clear. Beyond the murdered husband and embezzlement victims were communities shaken by the realization that such calculated deception had lived among them undetected. The defendant didn't just steal money or take a life. Prosecutor Elena Vasquez stated in her opening argument when the trial finally began in July 2025. She stole trust itself. Each victim believed they knew her, as a financial advisor, as a wife, as a friend, only to discover they had invited a predator into their lives, their homes, and their financial futures. The prosecution's case strengthened dramatically when investigators located a safety deposit box in Catherine's name at a bank in Idaho, containing what appeared to be a journal documenting her transformation from Catherine to Elaine. According to court documents, the journal included a section titled Lessons Learned, with detailed notes on how to improve her methods in future identity transitions. I underestimated the digital footprint problem. One entry read, "Next time, select someone with less technical expertise." David's cybersecurity background made him both useful for establishing my new digital presence and dangerous as he became suspicious. The ideal target should have resources but limited technical knowledge. This evidence shattered any remaining doubt about premeditation or future intent. More disturbing still was an entry dated just 1 month before David's murder, which read, "Exit strategy timeline needs acceleration." David's questions becoming more specific. Begin preparations for transition to Rebecca Lane identity. Target identified in San Diego, widower, real estate holdings, minimal family connections. She was already planning her next victim while still married to David. Detective Sharma testified. Based on the details in her notes, we've identified this potential target as Richard Collins, a recently widowed real estate developer who matches the profile described in her journal. When Mr. Collins was contacted by investigators, he confirmed having met Rebecca Lane at a charity fundraiser 2 months before David's murder. "She was charming, seemed genuinely interested in my work," he stated in his witness testimony. "We exchanged contact information. She reached out twice afterward about potential investment opportunities." Looking at the timeline now, I realize I would have been her next target after she disposed of her husband. The most damning evidence came from Catherine/Elaine herself. In a recorded jail phone call to a former colleague who had not yet been identified by investigators, she made a critical mistake. Believing the call to be unmonitored, she spoke more freely than she had since her arrest. "They don't have everything," she said. "The Idaho accounts are still secure. If I can get the right jury, I might be able to sell the mental health angle. These people want to believe in redemption stories." This statement, which prosecutors argued constituted an implicit admission of guilt and ongoing deception, was ruled admissible after her attorneys failed to have it excluded as privileged communication. At this point, the question is no longer about Catherine/Elaine's guilt, but about the justice system's ability to address a criminal whose entire life has been built on manipulating others' perceptions. How do you contain someone who views identities as disposable tools and other people as merely stepping stones to personal gain? What punishment could possibly fit crimes that span financial fraud, identity theft, and premeditated murder? And what can society learn from a case that exposes the frightening ease with which someone can shed one life and assume another? The answers, and the ultimate fate of one of the most methodical manipulators in recent criminal history, will be revealed in our final segment. Do you think someone capable of such elaborate deception can ever truly be rehabilitated? Share your thoughts in the comments below. The trial of Catherine Winters, known to her victims as Elaine Mercer, began on July 14, 2025, in a courtroom filled to capacity. Security measures were unprecedented, not just to prevent escape attempts, but to manage the intense public interest in a case that had captured national attention. This is not merely a murder trial, prosecutor Elena Vasquez stated in her opening argument. This is the unmasking of a predator who moved through the world wearing the faces of people you might trust, your financial advisor, your neighbor, your spouse, while systematically destroying lives for personal gain. For 6 weeks, the prosecution presented a case that legal observers described as airtight. Digital forensics experts traced Catherine's elaborate identity transitions. Financial analysts mapped the movement of stolen funds. Psychological experts explained the calculated nature of her manipulations. And at the center of it all was David Mercer, a man whose only crime was discovering the truth about the woman he had married. The turning point came during week 2, when the prosecution played the complete 911 call Catherine had made after murdering David. Audio analysts had enhanced the recording, revealing something the initial responders had missed. Before making the call, Catherine could be heard practicing her distressed voice, repeating phrases like, "Oh my God, he's dead," with different emotional inflections, searching for the most convincing performance. "What you're hearing is not grief," Dr. Harrington testified. "It's rehearsal." She was crafting the perfect traumatized widow persona before even dialing 911. This level of performance preparation moments after killing her husband demonstrates both her complete lack of emotional connection to her victim and her extraordinary focus on self-preservation. The defense strategy collapsed entirely when Catherine, against her attorney's advice, insisted on testifying in her own defense. What followed was described by legal observers as a masterclass in manipulation that ultimately self-destructed. For the first hour, Catherine presented as a sympathetic figure, describing a troubled childhood and claiming she had fled her former life out of fear rather than calculation. When confronted with financial evidence during cross-examination, her demeanor shifted dramatically, becoming precise, technical, and analytical as she attempted to explain away complex money transfers. The jury could literally see her switching personas based on what each situation demanded. Prosecutor Vasquez later commented, "When questioned about emotional matters, she was vulnerable and sympathetic. When challenged on technical details, she became coldly efficient. It was like watching someone change masks." The facade crumbled completely when Prosecutor Vasquez presented Catherine with a journal from the Idaho Safety Deposit Box. After initially denying authorship, Catherine studied the prosecutor's face carefully, appeared to make a calculation, and then underwent a transformation that court transcripts described simply as demeanor change. "You think you've won," Catherine said, her voice suddenly devoid of its previous emotional qualities. "But you've only caught me because David was smarter than I anticipated. Do you really think you understand what I'm capable of?" The courtroom fell silent as she continued, now speaking with clinical detachment. "I gave David 3 good years. He got a beautiful home, an active social life, and a wife who made him feel important. Most people go their entire lives without experiencing what I gave him. Was it really such a bad exchange?" This statement, intended to justify her actions, instead provided the final evidence needed for conviction on all counts. After just 6 hours of deliberation, the jury returned with guilty verdicts on charges of first-degree murder, identity theft, embezzlement, fraud, and money laundering. At the sentencing hearing in November 2025, Judge Marilyn Hernandez addressed Catherine directly. "In my 25 years on the bench, I have encountered criminals motivated by greed, by rage, by desperation. But I have never before seen someone who has made predation into a lifestyle, approaching each relationship as if it were simply another transaction to be optimized." The judge continued, "The calculated nature of your crimes, the elaborate preparation, the psychological manipulation of victims who believe themselves loved, and your complete lack of remorse leave this court with no option but the maximum sentence available." Catherine Winters received life imprisonment without possibility of parole, plus an additional 45 years for the financial crimes. She was designated as a special management inmate, requiring enhanced security protocols due to her extraordinary manipulation capabilities and flight risk. The resolution extended far beyond Catherine's incarceration. The task force established to investigate her crimes continued identifying victims and recovering assets. By December 2025, they had located an additional $1.2 million in cryptocurrency wallets and offshore accounts, including funds hidden in a digital wallet whose password was concealed in a seemingly innocent recipe card in her kitchen. These recovered assets were directed to a victim compensation fund, providing some measure of financial justice to the elderly clients whose retirement savings she had stolen. The first disbursements began in December 2025, prioritizing victims with immediate medical and housing needs. The psychological impact of the case reverberated through law enforcement and financial security communities. The Winters Protocol was established as a new framework for identifying predators who operate through identity transformation and relationship infiltration, a recognition that traditional background verification methods had failed to detect her pattern until it was too late. What makes this case so significant, Dr. Harrington explained in her address to the American Psychological Association's Emergency Symposium in October 2025, is that it forces us to reconsider our understanding of predatory behavior. Catherine Winters represents an evolutionary leap in criminal methodology, combining the emotional detachment of a psychopath with the strategic patience of a deep-cover operative and the financial acumen of a white-collar criminal. The case also transformed how financial institutions monitor for fraud. The Mercer algorithm, developed based on Catherine's methods, was implemented by major banks in November 2025 to flag unusual patterns of identity creation, relationship formation followed by asset consolidation, and preparation for rapid financial extraction. For the families of Catherine's victims, the resolution brought answers but little comfort. At a private gathering following the sentencing, they shared stories of the people whose lives she had damaged or destroyed, not just how they had suffered, but who they had been before Catherine entered their lives. "My brother was brilliant with technology, but trusting with people," Jennifer Mercer said during this gathering. "Catherine exploited that trust in the most profound way possible. But I refused to let his death be remembered only as her crime. He built security systems that protected thousands from digital threats. He volunteered teaching coding to kids. He lived a life of creation, while she dedicated hers to destruction." The most unexpected development came in late November 2025, when Catherine requested a meeting with FBI investigators. In exchange for certain privileges, including access to financial publications and business news, she offered to help identify other predators operating with similar methodologies. "There are others using my techniques," she told Agent Torres during their first authorized interview. "Not many. What I do requires a particular combination of traits. But they're out there, and they're watching this case, learning from my mistakes just as I learned from studying others." This cooperation, while valuable to law enforcement, did nothing to reduce her sentence. As one prosecutor noted, her assistance isn't motivated by remorse. She simply enjoys the intellectual challenge and the attention. Even now, she's playing a game, just with different rules. Perhaps the most profound legacy of the case came through legislative change. By December 2025, 12 states had drafted versions of David's Law, creating enhanced verification requirements for financial professionals and improved protocols for identity confirmation in high-value transactions. The digital trail that ultimately exposed Catherine Winters transformed how investigators approach complex, multi-jurisdictional cases. The FBI's Digital Evidence Laboratory began using the Winters case as its primary training model for financial forensics, identity tracking, and digital evidence recovery. For Detective Layla Sharma, who first noticed the inconsistencies in Catherine's story on that April evening in 2025, the case represented both a career-defining investigation and a sobering reminder of how effectively evil can disguise itself. "What stays with me isn't just what Catherine did, but how long she was able to do it," Detective Sharma stated in her final case review. "She moved through the world wearing a perfect mask of normalcy, building relationships based entirely on calculation rather than connection. It makes you wonder how many others might be out there, hiding behind faces we think we know." The final piece of the puzzle emerged in December 2025, when investigators discovered a storage unit in Seattle containing Catherine's earliest known writings, journals dating back to her college years. The entries revealed a young woman who had studied human behavior not out of interest in humanity, but as an engineer might study the vulnerabilities in a system they intend to exploit. "People are predictable," one entry read. "They mistake performance for authenticity. They want so desperately to believe in connection that they ignore inconsistencies. This is not a character flaw to be pitted. It's a vulnerability to be leveraged." Catherine Winters now resides in a maximum security federal facility, where she remains under constant surveillance with severely restricted communication privileges. According to prison officials, she has adapted to incarceration with the same calculated efficiency she brought to her crimes, already positioning herself within the complex social hierarchy of the prison system. Even in a controlled environment, she's dangerous, the facility's chief psychologist noted in a confidential assessment. "Not physically, but psychologically. She identifies vulnerabilities in both systems and people, then exploits them with extraordinary patience. We've had to rotate staff to prevent manipulation. For the public, the Catherine Winters case has become a cautionary tale about the masks people wear and the ease with which trust can be weaponized. Background verification services reported a 300% increase in requests throughout late 2025, and relationship therapists noted clients expressing what some have termed Mercer paranoia, a heightened suspicion of partners' unexplained behaviors or inconsistencies. Yet perhaps the most important lesson from this case is not about suspicion, but about the value of genuine connection. As David Mercer's sister Jennifer observed in her victim impact statement, Catherine studied human behavior, but never understood humanity. She saw relationships as transactions, trust as weakness, and love as leverage. In the end, for all her intelligence and calculation, she failed to grasp the one thing that makes life worth living: authentic connection to others. The woman who was Catherine Winters, then Elaine Mercer, and almost became Rebecca Lane has been contained, her web of deception dismantled, her victims honored through changes that may protect future potential targets. But the questions her case raises about identity, deception, and the dark potential of human calculation continue to haunt those who encountered her. A reminder that sometimes the greatest dangers were the most convincing disguises of normalcy. If you've been affected by financial fraud or know someone who has, resources are available through the National Center for Victims of Financial Crime. And if this investigation has raised questions about someone in your life, remember that while Catherine Winters represents an extreme case, her story underscores the importance of trusting your instincts when something feels wrong in a relationship. What other cases would you like us to investigate next? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and subscribe for more in-depth examinations of the cases that change how we understand criminal behavior.